Welcome to our recorded training. I'm Libby Moeller, Deputy Director of CASA for Kids, and with us today is Tavin Heaston, who is the Program Director for Clay, Clinton, and Marion counties. Tavin has been with us for many years now, and she is going to present for us today Advocacy with Purpose, a guide for best practice. And this is to really wrap around and undergird the foundation that National CASA has set forth in their pre-service training. If you've been through pre-service training, hopefully if you're watching this, you've been through pre-service, or maybe you're about to follow pre-service with this. Pre-service is really a quick dive into the child welfare system, while Advocacy with Purpose with Tavin today really goes into the meat and potatoes of what it's like to do best interest advocacy on the front lines as a volunteer and as a staff member in a CASA program. Tavin created this herself, and we are really excited for her to share a lot of her experience and a lot of her knowledge with us today.
Okay. Thank you very much, Libby. And just to add, the thought behind this is to create more confident advocates who feel like they have the tools and the knowledge to take on the cases and to really advocate for the kids that we're court appointed to. So, first and foremost, I really want to start with our mission. I think it's something that we kind of look at and we read it and we're just like, okay, like that's our mission, right? So just to read through it real quick, but CASA for Kids provides court-appointed volunteer advocacy for children who have experienced abuse or neglect in the counties we are assigned in the second and fourth judicial court circuits. To us, that means something, right? We know what that means. To everyday civilians, to people who haven't signed up to be an advocate, who haven't gone through that training, that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to them, right? I know that before I even, got involved in foster care in this world that is so unique and different from other walks of life, I had no idea what a circuit was, what a court circuit was. And so we really, as advocates, like, yes, this is our mission, but what does our mission really mean when we start putting that into motion?
Absolutely.
Yes. So I wonder if I can, sorry, I just wanted to move my screen over a little. So in the role of an advocate and, staff, myself, what does our mission look like? How do we apply our mission to the work that we do? Oftentimes this turns into a short little elevator pitch for myself. When someone says, hey, what's CASA, or what does CASA do? Well, in simple terms, I want to rely on that mission, right? I want to go back to our mission. But what does that mean when we really start dissecting that and breaking that down? And so I say, well, gosh, we go out, we make sure the kids are residing in safe placements. We make sure that they are receiving the resources that they need and that they deserve. How are they doing in school? What's the teacher observing? Teachers are an excellent resource when we're trying to figure out information and what's going on in the lives of our kids in care, right? They're with them however many hours a day. They know them, so we rely on them. What does permanency look like? Is the case moving at an appropriate pace through the system? Does the child have safe permanency options? Whether that's returning home or in the form of adoption or guardianship, independence, etc. What does that look like? Are the decisions that are being made for the child and the family being done so with their best interests in mind? Are these decisions helpful or are they harmful? As CASAs, we are in a really unique position where we can sit back and we can view what's happening in all aspects of a case, right? We observe those things. We take account of those things, and then we apply them, right? When we're submitting our concerns and our recommendations, to the court. And we just want to make sure that the best interest of the child and the family is truly at the center of what's being done, right? That is the ultimate goal. So we've touched base on that, but Now it's time to like put that into motion, right? We've been sworn in, we've done the training, Amber's teed us up, like we're ready to go. We've got our letter of appointment, we've got our order of appointment. So now we're going to put our mission into motion, and everything we do surrounding our mission and putting that into motion should be done with purpose, right? We are purpose driven for our kids. So that means all the phone calls, all the text messages, emails, home visits, school check-ins, anything that you are doing within a case should be done with the purpose of making sure those kids are in a safe place, ensuring they're receiving those resources they need, gathering that information to prepare your court report. Because all roads, right, lead to the courthouse. That's something I think we forget as we're moving throughout a case. We are ultimately, our role, right, is to report back to the judge, to give him a picture, or her a picture of what that looks like. How is the child doing in the home? Are they okay? How's the family doing? So everything that we do should be in that mindset of I'm prepping my court report. I'm providing relevant information of substance to the court so that they can make good decisions for this family and for this child. So I like, it's really like a little map in between hearings, right? And once we have a hearing, we start all over, right? We're starting all over. We're doing it again in prepping our report. So making contact, I think this is kind of the feels like the biggest thing that we do is communicating, home visits, seeing our kids. So just a little kind of refresher on what that should look like, and ways that we can improve on that in order to make those not worth our time, but truly worth our time, right? Our advocates, the majority of them, they have full-time jobs. Their time is valuable. Our foster parents' time is valuable. Caseworkers' times are valuable. So how do we make the most out of, making contact with the child and other parties in the case? So,
That's so true. I think upwards of 75% of our advocates and volunteers are work full time. So they're watching
yes.
this from the comfort of their couch, or maybe their lunch break at work, or maybe they're walking or running or listening in the car. So yeah, that's a really important point to point out.
Yeah. Yeah, we understand that. And um one thing too, I think that kind of works well, even if you do have a busier schedule, is that not all of our communication is done in person, right? We can utilize the phone, we can text, we can email. It's a great thing that we can do, but in order to really kind of start building those relationships, right? And being able to explain our role and what we do, I always recommend, and whether you are just getting started on a case or you are in your sixth home visit, right? Schedule a call with the foster parent. In the beginning, I always say that do it because it's a really good icebreaker, right? Prior to your first visit, you're not just showing up, or you're not just giving them a cold call. Um, you're saying, hey, like, this is who I am. I've been court appointed to recommend,
Mhm.
give recommendations to the court in the best interest of the child, right? So I like a good icebreaker. So call the foster parent, explain your role, tell them what they can expect from us. Talk about what does their schedule look like, right? They may have 5 kids in their home with all the extracurricular activities. So it helps us kind of prepare for what our visits may look like, what days. Let them know that we can visit when the caseworker comes, or we can come, if it works. A lot of our advocates do Saturday morning visits or Sunday afternoon visits because that's what works for them and that's what works for the family. So it doesn't have to be this cookie cutter Monday through Friday 8 to 4 thing, right? We can be flexible in that, and we can accommodate the family and at a time that works for us. But a scheduled call or a planned call, done at a time that works for the caregiver, where they're not distracted, where they don't have, a bunch of other things going on, it's going to allow time for a more in-depth conversation, right? It's going it's going to let them know, like, hey, like, you have my full attention. Do you have any concerns? it's just
Mhm.
it's just a really good way, I think, to start building those relationships prior, and also getting information prior to a home visit so that our home visits can be, more child focused, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, so I have, these are some questions. These are example of questions. These are not all the questions, right? But these are an example of questions that can be asked over the phone, because sometimes there are topics throughout a case that should not be discussed in front of a child, right? We don't want to talk about a kiddo like they're not in the room. And we also don't want to talk about concerns, especially if those are involving a parent or something more sensitive. We're not going to want to have those conversations in front of foster parents. So just, how is the child adjusting in the home, right? This is incredibly important to keep track of. A lot of times, our kiddos are in their second, third, fourth placement, right? So how are they adjusting? What's the status of visitation? What's that visitation schedule look like? School information. We want to know where they go to school, right? Because we've got to follow up on that. Medical information, counseling, therapy. Who is the caseworker? We may know who the caseworker is, but does the family know who the caseworker is? How often do they visit? And something that I think that is kind of looked over a lot, and is something that I try to get information on in the beginning. Is the home licensed? Are they a licensed home? Is this a kinship placement? Is this a relative placement? Because we all know that, this may not necessarily, I think it does matter because I feel like foster parents should get that full, board payment. But it's going to matter when it comes time for adoption, and when we're closing out cases and stuff. The licensing process has to happen, and that does take some time. So we need to get that rolling sooner rather than later, right? Because we want to wrap these cases up, and we don't need to keep kids in care for things that can be handled earlier on in a case. So just knowing, what that is, and then just, does the foster parent have any concerns, that they want to talk about, that maybe could be addressed or filtered out, prior to that visit, and maybe something that you can even assist, resource wise. So these are just some questions that can be asked over the phone. And a lot of times this may turn into, instead of a, check-in phone call, it turns into text message or email, or, whatever form of communication works best for both parties. So, um, at our home visit, right? We've arrived at our home visit. Um, gosh, keeping good documentation, which we're going to cover here soon, but we have to have good observations first, right? Even though, our home visits may feel like, they're intended to just ensure that the kids are in a safe place, to help, but they're really intended to help gather, information on what that child's life is like, right? What they're experiencing, and to make sure that challenges are being addressed, services are being received, and that the case is, ultimately moving forward. So this is just an example list of what should be observed during a visit. You know, interactions. Are they inclusive with the kids? I think that, which that's at the bottom here, but it's kind of one of the most important things that I think we can observe is what, how is the kiddo being treated in the home? Are they inclusive? What do those relationships look like? Is everyone getting, are they getting along? Um, it kind of goes back to um, part of that building that rapport, preparing that child for permanency. So that's something that's just really incredibly important. Um, Sorry, my mouse is all over the place. So, and also, like, is that child seeking out their caregiver, right? Are they seeking them for their wants and their needs? That's an excellent sign of attachment and adjustment. When you see a kiddo seeking out their foster parent, or the person in charge, essentially, right, to meet their needs. But always at every visit, we document who's present, who is present in that home. We should know who lives in the home, but always just say, like, we attended a visit. This is who was present. It's just a good habit to get into. Home environment, what's that look like, right? The child's overall demeanor, we if it's, not so great, we really want to see that progression. We want to see them get adjusted. We want to see their demeanor change, right? A child's physical appearance, what does that look like? Is it 90 degrees outside and they're in a turtleneck? Do they have ill-fitted clothing? Do they have clothing? Bruising, all the things. We want them to look their very best. So making note of a child's appearance is super important. And then sleeping arrangements. Um, you know, do they have their own room? If so, what does that room look like? Does it look like just a guest room in the house, or is it a child's room? Is it full of things that they like? Does it have their interests in it? Is it age appropriate? Are they sharing a room? If so, who are they sharing a room with? Do they have a bed? There are times where I've gone to home visits and there's no bed. Those are things that, we can step in and we can help with. But knowing these things is it's really important for the child's well-being, but also just, what we're gathering about the overall home environment and the child's placement. So we've done our good observations, right? So now we're going to move in to documentation. And it is very important that we keep good documentation of our observations and our interactions, as it's really essential to the integrity of the advocacy that we provide. Our contact logs should be detailed and consistent. It allows us to track case progress. We're going to maintain reliable timelines. We're going to respond more effectively to challenges that arise throughout the life of a case. So I know that a lot of times, you're going to feel like we are a broken record, but documenting is just incredibly important. So just to refresh on, our observations and interactions and where they go, they are entered into Optima as a contact log. I've put a little screenshot here of what those tabs look like. When you go into your case and you open your case up and you scroll to the bottom, you're going to see these tabs, right? So all your contact logs are going to be entered under this contact log tab. And then all your case related documents, so that's going to be your school report forms, grades, attendance, medical documents, important email communications that you feel like really need to be on file. This is also where you're going to find those court documents that we've uploaded. You're going to find case files and things like that. So anything of importance, you're going to upload that into the documents tab. Now, if you are unable to do that, or if you're not having a hard time figuring it out, or simply maybe you just don't have the time or the resources, get those to your advocate supervisor, and we'll get those uploaded into there for you. It is important, and you will find this information be incredibly helpful when you start piecing that court report together. So again, back to being a broken record, because we are constantly saying, please put that into Optima. Make sure that gets into Optima. Hey, did you put that in Optima? But it is truly so important for us to maintain good, detailed notes, right? We want to maintain accuracy. We want to be reliable, right? Not just to the court, but to foster parents and caseworkers. We want to be a reliable source for them. So precise notes, that's going to help reduce errors and inconsistencies. Sometimes we think in the moment like, oh, there's no way I'm going to forget that, right? I'm going to remember that. But after a month goes by, it's pretty easy to forget stuff. So it's important to get those notes in and good notes in a timely manner. Good record keeping is going to hold us accountable, because we should be held accountable, right? We're holding every other party accountable. CASA should be held accountable. It helps us to remember to follow up about certain situations or conversations or challenges that have come up. It's going to allow us to better track the progress of cases. Tracking the progress of a case outside of court is just as important as inside of court. I might even argue that it's even more important, right? To track those. How's it going? And this may pertain to a progression, or, progression of visits, or lack of progression for visits, right? In visits with parents, but also like how a parent is on their services, or simply how a child is adjusting after 7 months and they're still struggling to find some time of attachment or adjustment in their home. That we need to look into that. Why, what's going on, what's keeping that from happening. It keeps communication flowing between, CASA staff and volunteers, right? Your advocate supervisor. They're going to be able to read your contact logs. They're going to be able to point out any concerns that may need to be followed up on that maybe was an oversight. And it really just helps keep everyone on the same page, right? And informed. And, just timelines in general are so important. We want our observations and interactions to be recorded in order of how they occurred, right? We want to maintain that historical accuracy. This is, it helps us when we review efforts in progress. It helps prepare in the instance that we have to be put on the stand, right? We want to know, how that works. And so timelines are incredibly important. And our notes, have also at times been a great resource for caseworkers. We know that the agency struggles with turnover, right? So we get caseworkers coming in who are unfamiliar with the case. We've been on the case for a year, right? So we have knowledge and we have notes. We should have good detailed notes. And so as they're attempting to fill in the gaps of the case history for themselves, they rely on us, right? They'll come and say, "Hey, I read this. Can you give me some additional context to that? Do you know when this occurred?" So I think we also have that ability to be able to support, other members and other parties as they're doing their own casework, right, within a case. We want everyone to be on the same page. Our effort should be collaborative. Okay. So we do have, I call these monthly expectations for Optima. It's, as I'm going through them, this is what I'm looking for. Do we have this, do we have this information? Are we gathering this stuff? But, it's hard to meet expectations if we don't know what those expectations are. So, child contact, we should be seeing our kiddos once every 30 days. And these visits should take place predominantly, in the child's home, in their placement, right? But periodically, we're going to go see a parent-child visit or a sibling visit. And sometimes our advocates will make arrangements with the school and we'll go see our kiddos, while they're at school. And those things are okay. But I do always like to say, like, just know that, parent-child visits should be done with the utmost discretion, right? This is that's family time. Unless there's, a challenge and we need to come in and observe, those really are sacred and we should let those be as that. And then communication with the caseworker. Like I said, CASAs were meant to work collaboratively, right, with agency staff. Monthly contact with a caseworker is going to help foster a good working relationship with them. And it's also going to help keep us informed from the agency side of the case, what they're working towards, right, what their expectations are. We should always be aware of the status of parents. This isn't always an easy topic. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, right? We go over that in training. Sometimes it is. But we should know whether it's, through the parent themselves, through the agency, the caseworker, what type of progress are they making? We should be able to say, like, how's mom doing? How's dad doing, right? We should know if they're rated satisfactory or unsatisfactory in their services. And that is really like a bare minimum standard of knowing what's going on with parents, right? But it's hard for us how we cannot give the best recommendations for these kiddos without knowing the progress of parents, right? Because return home is always, or it should always, that should always be the end goal until it isn't, right? Return home until it isn't. And we need to keep that in mind as we're moving towards the case. And these communications are meant to help build our solid court reports, right? Because if you've been through the training, you've seen the template, right? You've gotten the welcome packet. there is a portion on there that we report, on parents. We want to know the status of parents. We want to know the status of child. So all these things have a purpose, right? We are purpose driven in our observations and the communications that we're doing, and so it all just really circles back. You know, and sometimes this may be in one contact log, right? One big contact log. Say you did a child and family team meeting that month, and everybody was present. That may all be there. That doesn't have to be, six different entries, right? In a month. This could all be one. It's not complicated, but we should be getting this type of information on a month-to-month basis, right? So, and these communications, they're not always going to be in person. They can be text, they can be emails, phone calls, that kind of thing. So it is going to be different. And then again, just touching back on that supervisor advocate communication. I think that's just a great way to kind of strengthen the CASA team. Okay, meaning and context. I always like to touch on this one because I think in the moment, a lot of these statements or, when we're making our notes, they're meant with good intention, right? We're describing something or we think that we are. But if we're reading it from someone who isn't familiar with the case, right? If an attorney is reading this or the guardian ad litem is reading this, there, context it's gonna matter, right? Um, they're kind of vague and they do lack context. So like the children were dirty, that simply states a condition that leaves room for the how and the why, right? Being dirty because they've been playing outside all day or they've been at daycare or they're in the sandbox. That is different than hygiene, right? Poor hygiene. I think that just leaves a lot to ponder on when we say that. When we talk about developmental milestones, I see this a lot. Mindy's meeting her developmental milestones. Well, that's great, but what are those? What is she doing, right? What does she do? What is she doing that's making her succeed in those? Um, were the children being dressed inappropriately? I see this a lot. Children were dressed inappropriately or children were dressed appropriately. Well, what does that mean, right? That's going to mean something different. It's going to mean something different to other people, right? So were they ill-fitted? Was it inappropriate for the weather? Again, back to that turtleneck and the 90-degree weather. Uh, Bobby is up to date on his medical needs. Well, it's just a general statement, right? What are those medical needs? Or what medical needs did he have? Did he have any medical needs? And I feel like kids are rare in the sense that they always have a medical need, right? Especially if it's dental or something following up. So it doesn't always have to be this very broad, every single box, but Bobby may have an upcoming dental appointment, or he might have just been to the dentist, or he had a physical, or something of that nature. I think we can just get a little more in depth of what medical needs are look like, how those are being addressed or not being addressed. A lot of times, dentists is a big challenge for a lot of families, especially in our area. And so then we can kind of pull together and try to figure out. It allows us to pull together to figure out how do we get Bobby to the dentist, which is incredibly important. Another thing. So what may not be relevant today may be relevant tomorrow, right? At the beginning of the case, we have or we should have the goal of return home in mind, right? However, we know in those instances, that doesn't always happen. And so recording the efforts of caregivers as they are helping a child adjust to their home, describing the interactions that we see and the relationships and the bonds that we are observing are really important aspects that have the great potential of being needed for a best interest hearing in the future, right? Or we may be witnessing an unhealthy dynamic in a child's placement, right? And regardless of the permanency goal, that child may need to be placed elsewhere in order for them to be in a better environment, right? And sometimes these situations, they don't always just reveal themselves. It does so over a length of time. And so it does require good record keeping in order for us to show factual observations observations, to the court, to the agency, to the GAL, when those things are occurring. So I always say, it's okay to make note of like foster mom making them their favorite snack after school, right? Or them getting to paint their walls the favorite color. Or, just hey, these siblings fight all the time and it's getting worse and it's in some instances getting more violent, right? Between foster kiddos and bio kiddos, and that's just, gosh, it's just not working. Like, and that doesn't mean, oh, the child needs removed. That may mean, what resources can we get to come in and help that family kind of resolve some of the underlying issues that are going on, right? It's not always, terrible crisis situation, but there are things that can be done to better that. All right, trauma-informed boundaries. This is something I think that we don't think about, right? When we're coming in, we're gonna help. We just want to help these kids, right? We're not thinking about uh, the child's history, and unfortunately, the extent of a child's history is not always known, right? It's often very much unknown. So physical contact should always be approached with caution and respect for the child's history, which is far too often unknown, even to the agency. Unfortunately, things don't always get brought to the surface, right? We do not transport, we don't babysit the children that we're appointed to, and we don't supervise visitation of any kind. Okay. Lap sitting is not permitted. Again, we may not be aware of the child's trauma history or their comfort levels. Appropriate alternatives to those things are, sitting beside the child while you're reading a book or you're doing an activity, you're coloring, you're engaging in conversation, right? So sitting next to them, sitting in close proximity, that's an appropriate alternative. Creating a fun handshake, giving high fives, like that's a way to bond with a kid, something special that you can do that stays within those appropriate boundaries. And then, the phrase I love you really is an emotional language that can really often be confusing or triggering, especially when a child's full history is unknown to us. Saying I love you, it just may unintentionally create a type of emotional dependency or discomfort, which could, hinder the child's ability to even trust us, right? Far too often, our kiddos, they hear I love you, and that I love you is coming from their abuser. So it's just always something to keep in mind as we're just interacting with our kids, that they just have a different idea of what that means, but they're going to say it to you, right? They're going to say it. And so just a really just a appropriate response or an example would be, thank you, you were so kind, or that is so kind of you to say. That it's not, you're not deflecting, you're not ignoring the kindness and the sweetness of the phrase I love you. It just, at this point in their lives, just means something different to them. So trauma informed boundaries as we take care of these kiddos is just super important. So just to wrap that up, basic expectations and what those look like. Confidentiality, this is just, it is so important to the work that we do. We shouldn't be providing personal information about the progress or situations of parents to foster parents. We should not provide foster parent information to parents, and if you're ever unsure of what or how much information you can share with other parties, just please ask your advocate supervisor if they're not available, program director, even the caseworker. Sometimes, you can kind of get an idea of what's appropriate and what's not. We really want to kind of stay in our lane when it comes to some of that sharing of that information. Again, children are to be seen once every 30 days. Most of these visits should take place within the child's placement. We know that life happens, seasons of life, we get really busy. Sometimes we don't always fit within that 30 days, but we want to. And so if something has come up and that's not going to happen, that kind of goes back to that communication with your advocate supervisor so that we can come in and say, okay, is it okay to go outside that 30 days a few days? Or, do we need to step in and do we need to go see that kiddo? And that's just a conversation that you're going to have with your advocate supervisor. Um, Again, within a child's placement, we know what the alternatives to that can look like. Um, we know that, attending parent-child visit should be approached with discretion. We know that. Um, Communication with the caseworker, maintaining monthly contact with the caseworker is gonna, really help foster a positive working relationship, which is incredibly important to the work that we do, right? We're all on the same team. We want to get that family across that finish line. We hope that return home can happen, but if not, the best possible safe placement for the kiddos is what we need for them. We also just really want to stay informed. So communication with the caseworker is incredibly important. Knowing the status of parents, again, that can be just following up with the caseworker. But parents deserve to be represented in court as well. Their efforts and their progress should be noted, and that's just a good way to support the family. And then communicate with your advocate supervisor or program director about any challenges that arise. Maintaining and contact logs. That is just another great way to keep the team informed.